For this lesson, I'm going to draw a pretty simple subject, a marshmallow. Just bought from the supermarket, regular old marshmallow like we use for s'mores. And I have here my marshmallow. I have a plastic eraser, a kneaded rubber eraser, and a sharpener. And I've got an HB pencil, a 3H pencil, which is a little lighter than the HB. And then I have a 2B and a 4B. And these will be more than enough for this simple subject. So to start out, we have to first think about this object a little bit differently than we might normally. When we think of an object like a marshmallow, the first thing we think of if asked about its shape might be a cylinder. And maybe from geometry or just from your idea of what a cylinder looks like, the first thing that's going to pop in your mind is something like this. If you're going to shade it, maybe it would go like this. But depending on the way you're looking at this object, it could look different. So if you're looking at it with one of the flat ends facing you, it might look something like a circle. If you're looking at it on an angle then, that circle then starts to appear to look more like an oval. And that oval would then be attached to the flat sides of the marshmallow. And then the back end of it would also be curved. So we go from here to here. And now what happens if we turn it all the way? Then it ends up looking more or less like a rectangle. So there really is a whole lot more to the cylinder than we might have thought before. Plus, this object isn't a perfect cylinder. It's got some texture, it's got maybe some mushed ends. Some things are not quite as perfect as they would be if we were thinking of your classic cylinder soup can shape. So that's the first thing to realize. Also, a white object, when we're going to shade it, isn't just going to be shaded with one dark end on one side, gradually fading and getting a little bit lighter as it goes to the other side. That's often what we do when we doodle. Actually, after we consider the shape of the object, of this marshmallow, we then have to look at shapes within that shape. And one way to look at it is that the shadows themselves are actually shapes as well as the marshmallow shape itself. So it's like a puzzle. You can put together the different values, the lightest values, the midtones, the darkest values, some reflected light, and if you put them all together the right way, they'll look like a three-dimensional marshmallow. So what I mean by breaking down the shapes, and I'm going to use my sharpener right now because my pencil needs it. When looking at this marshmallow, and I'm just doing this for demonstration's sake, we can look at it as being several different shadows. I see some reflected light coming from the paper surface that this object's sitting on. I see a really dark area of shadow that I can put some values in lightly. Then I see a little area of midtone. It's gradually fading, but it is lighter than that darkest area of shadow. Some of the darkest areas also seem to crawl up the edge here in almost like an L shape. And this side seems a little bit dark. When I'm looking at this marshmallow as well, I also see at the end here, away from my vision, there it gets a little bit darker, subtle, but a little bit. And it curves a little bit. Now, there's also cast shadows, which is the shadow that is on the paper surface underneath the marshmallow. Sometimes there's more than one. Sometimes you'll see several, depending on how many light sources you have. If you have only one light source, then you'll have one strong shadow. If you have several light sources, then you might get overlapping shadows, which complicates things a little bit. But for now, with my light source right now, I have one bigger shadow, and it's darker than the whole marshmallow. So I'm just going to draw that in. I'm going pretty loosely at this point. I'm not worried about getting it perfect yet. Because again, this is more for demonstration than for the finished drawing. So now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, all right, this part here, from my point of view, is the lightest part. And the reflected light is just a little bit less light than that. And then I could make this part just a little darker. So I'm actually comparing. If I were puzzling these together, I'd want to make sure that I could tell a little bit of a difference between each one, and I'm going to look between the different parts and see, do I need to darken one as compared to another area, or do I just leave it? Here I see that one part of that flat side is darker than the other. And in fact, there's also no line there. This side is a little bit darker, but it doesn't mean there's an outline here. There's no darker spot. The line that we often think of when we're creating this in the cylinder shape is really just an imagined border between this darker end and the lighter body of the marshmallow. So one way to simplify a drawing like this is looking at it as shadow shapes. You're not going to outline your shadow shapes, but I'm just showing you that there are several different major shadow areas. We have our highlight area. We have a mid-tone, or like a body shadow, some people call it. We have our shadow core, which would be on the object, the darker area, where the center, the darkest area of the shadow is. We could also consider this area to be maybe not a shadow core, but it's definitely darker than this mid-tone. Over here, this is another mid-tone. Then we have our shadow. And underneath here, we will have what's called the crack, which is the darkest spot in between where the marshmallow is and the shadow. So we have several things here. If we break it down into shapes like this, it just becomes a little bit easier to understand how to shade it. But when you're starting your own drawing, it's best to start light, because the pencil that I just drew with is really heavy, very dark. So I'm going to start with my 3H pencil, and I'm going to set up my marshmallow there. And the first thing I'm going to do is to make the shape really lightly. And you can make as many mistakes as possible at this point, because your pencil is so light that on this video it may even be hard to see.